A notification appeared on my phone while I was buying groceries, a tag from my sister-in-law on a social media post. I almost didn't click it. Almost kept walking down the produce aisle, picking tomatoes and pretending my hands weren't shaking. But I clicked it. And there was my husband, Blake, at a rooftop bar in downtown Seattle. His arm draped around a blonde woman I'd never seen before. The caption read, "Living my best single life. #freedom feels. #no ring, no rules." I stood there in the middle of Whole Foods, holding an avocado in one hand and my phone in the other, staring at the photo of my husband. Still legally my husband, still wearing his wedding ring in our bedroom this morning, celebrating being single to his 3,000 followers. The comments were already rolling in. Friends congratulating him. Women I didn't know adding fire emojis. Someone asking, "What happened to your wife?" And another person responding, "Who cares? He looks happy." My vision narrowed. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store seemed too bright, the music too loud, the other shoppers too close. But I didn't cry, didn't gasp, didn't drop my phone or make a scene. Instead, I set down the avocado very carefully, opened my text messages, and typed a single sentence to my divorce attorney. "Execute plan. He just gave us everything we need." Then I finished my grocery shopping, because that's what you do when you've been planning for this moment for 3 months. When you've known your husband was having an affair since February, when you've been quietly photographing bank statements and backing up files and meeting with lawyers while he thought you were at yoga. You finish your grocery shopping. You go home. You cook dinner. You smile. And you wait for the perfect moment to destroy him. My name is Vivian Hayes, and this is the story of how my husband's arrogance gave me the greatest gift, proof that I'd been right to stop trusting him months ago. The really beautiful thing? Blake had no idea what was coming. He thought I was clueless, thought I spent my days organizing charity events and having lunch with friends, thought I was too soft, too trusting, too dependent on him to ever see through his lies. He was wrong about all of it. I'd seen through his lies the moment they started. I just hadn't been ready to do anything about them yet. Hadn't gathered enough evidence. Hadn't secured my assets. Hadn't positioned myself for the cleanest possible exit. But now, with this idiotic social media post where he'd literally announced he was cheating, I had everything I needed. I drove home slowly, carefully, signaled at every turn, followed every traffic rule, the same way I'd been conducting myself for 3 months, perfectly, legally, beyond reproach. Our house sat at the end of a tree-lined street in the wealthy Laurelhurst neighborhood. A 4-bedroom craftsman with water views that Blake loved showing off to his friends. He'd always introduce it as our house, but the deed told a different story. The house had been purchased with money from my inheritance, my grandmother's money. The down payment, the mortgage payments, the renovations, all funded by the trust fund my grandmother had established before she died. Blake had contributed exactly nothing to this house, except his opinion on paint colors. But he'd spent our marriage acting like he'd built it with his bare hands. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, gathering myself. Through the window, I could see the light on in Blake's home office. He was probably home now, probably posting more photos from his single life, probably messaging that blonde woman. 3 months ago, I would have confronted him, would have thrown the phone in his face and demanded explanations, would have cried and screamed and asked why I wasn't enough. Now, I knew better. Confrontation gave him the chance to lie, to manipulate, to turn things around and make me doubt what I knew to be true. So instead, I'd spent 3 months quietly preparing, and now it was time. I walked into the house with my grocery bags. Blake emerged from his office, hair perfectly styled, wearing the expensive designer sweater I bought him for his birthday. "Hey babe," he said, smiling like he hadn't just publicly humiliated me. "How was your day?" "Fine," I replied, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "How was yours?" "Great. Had drinks with some guys from work. You know, networking." Lies. All lies. But I smiled and nodded. "I saw Marcus posted some photos," I said casually, unpacking vegetables. "Looked like fun." Blake's expression shifted. Just a flicker of something. Gone so fast most people would have missed it. But I saw it. Fear. Calculation. Wondering what I'd seen. "Oh yeah," he said. "Too casual. Just the usual industry thing. Boring stuff." I pulled out my phone, opened the photo of him with the blonde woman, and set it face up on the counter between us. The color drained from his face. "Vivian, don't." My voice was calm, flat. "I'm not having this conversation with you. Not tonight. It's not what it looks like." "Blake." "Stop talking." He stopped, mouth hanging open, looking at me like he'd never seen me before. Which, in a way, he hadn't. He'd spent 10 years married to a version of me he'd invented, soft Vivian, accommodating Vivian, Vivian who believed his lies and made excuses for his behavior. That Vivian was gone. "I'm going upstairs," I said. "I'm going to take a bath. When I come down, you'll be sleeping in the guest room. We'll discuss this tomorrow." "Vivian, please. Tomorrow, Blake." I walked past him, up the stairs, into our bedroom, closed and locked the door. Then, and only then, I ran a bath, more for the illusion of normalcy than any actual desire to relax. While the tub filled, I pulled out the burner phone I'd purchased 2 months ago. Untraceable, unknown to Blake, used only for communicating with my attorney. The text from Catherine came through immediately. Saw the post. "This is exactly what we needed. Are you safe? Do you need me to file tonight?" I typed back, "I'm safe. He doesn't know I've been planning this. File first thing tomorrow morning. I want him served at work." Aggressive. I love it. "Papers will be filed at 9 a.m. Process server will deliver to his office by noon." Perfect. I deleted the message thread, powered off the phone, and tucked it back into its hiding spot behind a loose board in my closet. Then I sank into the bath and let the hot water ease the tension from my shoulders. Tomorrow, Blake's world would implode. He'd be served with divorce papers. He'd discover that I'd known about his affair for months. He'd learn that his casual cruelty and arrogant assumption that I'd never leave had cost him everything. Most importantly, he'd realize that the woman he'd been cheating on was about to take the house, the car, and half his assets in what would be the most expensive mistake of his life. But tonight, I needed to rest, needed to be ready for the storm that was coming. From downstairs, I heard Blake moving around, heard him make a phone call, probably to the blonde woman, probably trying to do damage control. His voice was muffled through the floor, but I caught phrases. "She saw the post. I don't know what she'll do. No, she's not like that. She won't make a scene." He really didn't know me at all. The funny thing was, Blake thought he was so clever. Thought he'd been hiding his affair perfectly. Thought I was too busy with my charity work and book club and yoga classes to notice that he was coming home later, checking his phone constantly, taking mysterious business trips. But I'd noticed everything. Every late night, every unexplained expense, every time his story didn't quite add up. And I'd documented it all. Bank statements showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to. Credit card bills revealing hotel rooms. Phone records with hours of calls to an unknown number. Photos saved to the cloud from trips where he'd claimed to be alone. I had everything. Every piece of evidence needed to prove adultery, financial misconduct, and, most importantly, that Blake had been systematically deceiving me while benefiting from my family's money. The water was cooling. I got out, dried off, put on my pajamas, looked at myself in the mirror, really looked, maybe for the first time in months. I was 35 years old, still young, still attractive, still whole, despite Blake's attempts to make me feel otherwise. For years, he'd been chipping away at my confidence. Subtle comments about my appearance, suggestions that I wasn't fun anymore, implications that I was lucky he stayed with someone as high maintenance as me. It had worked, for a while. I'd started second-guessing myself. Started thinking maybe I was the problem. Then I'd found the first piece of evidence, a receipt from a jewelry store, dated on my birthday, but I'd never received any jewelry. And suddenly everything clicked into focus. I wasn't the problem. Blake was. And once I'd accepted that, once I'd stopped making excuses for him, I'd seen everything clearly. The lies, the manipulation. The casual cruelty disguised as jokes, all of it. I brushed my teeth, turned off the bathroom light, and climbed into bed. My bed, in my house, that I'd bought with my money. A fact Blake conveniently forgot whenever he was showing off to his friends about our beautiful home. Tomorrow, he'd be reminded, forcefully. Sleep didn't come easily, but it came. And when I woke up the next morning, Blake was already gone, left for work early, probably hoping to avoid me. His car was gone from the driveway, the guest room door left open, the bed unmade. Typical Blake, creating messes and expecting someone else to clean them up. I made coffee, toast, sat at the kitchen table, and waited for 9 a.m. At exactly 9 o'clock, my regular phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Papers filed. At 12:17, he called again, and again at 12:19, then 12:23, then 12:30. I didn't answer. At 12:45, Blake's car screeched into the driveway. He burst through the front door, wild-eyed, holding a manila envelope. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, waving the divorce papers. I looked up from my coffee. Calm, composed. Divorce papers. I thought that was obvious. You're divorcing me? Because of one stupid photo? I'm divorcing you because you're having an affair. The photo just made it public. I'm not, Vivian, you're overreacting. I have bank statements showing charges at restaurants on nights you claim to be working late. I have hotel receipts from trips where you said you were traveling alone. I have phone records documenting thousands of calls to a number registered to Kimberly Ashford. That's the blonde from the photo, by the way. His face went pale. You've been spying on me? I've been paying attention. There's a difference. This is insane. You can't just divorce me. I can. I did. You'll be out of this house by the end of the week. This is my house too. Actually, it's not. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared, slid it across the table to him. The deed is in my name only. The house was purchased with money from my grandmother's trust. You've never contributed a dime to the mortgage. Legally, this is my separate property. Blake opened the folder, scanned the documents, and I watched understanding dawn. Then fear. Then rage. You've been planning this, he said slowly. This wasn't about the photo. You've been planning this for months. 3 months, actually. Since I found the receipt from the jewelry store. The emerald necklace you bought for Kimberly on my birthday. Vivian, pack your things, Blake. You have until Friday. And that was when I saw it. The moment Blake realized he'd underestimated me. That the woman he'd been lying to, cheating on, and taking for granted had been 10 steps ahead of him the entire time. It was beautiful. Blake didn't move out that week. Instead, he hired a lawyer, an expensive one named Gregory Walsh, who specialized in representing wealthy men in divorce proceedings. I'd expected this. Catherine had warned me that Blake would fight, that men like him always did, men who were used to getting their way, who'd spent their marriages assuming their wives would never push back. Let him fight, Catherine had said during our prep meeting months ago. We have all the evidence, the affair, the finances. The fact that you own the house. He has nothing except his ego. The first salvo came 5 days after I'd served him. A letter from Gregory Walsh, demanding that Blake be allowed to remain in the marital residence during the divorce proceedings, arguing that forcing him out would cause him undue hardship. Catherine's response was swift and brutal. A counterfiling with photos of Blake's social media post, documentation of his affair, and a request for exclusive use of the residence based on the fact that I solely owned it. The judge ruled in my favor. Blake had 2 weeks to vacate. During those 2 weeks, the house became a war zone. Not loud. Blake was too image-conscious for screaming matches, but cold, tense, every interaction carefully calculated. "You're really going through with this," he said one evening, finding me in the kitchen. "Yes, over a mistake. Over months of lying, of cheating, of taking advantage of my family's money while pretending you'd built our life. I worked too. I contributed. You made a decent salary and spent it on yourself. Every major expense, this house, the cars, the vacations, was funded by my trust. You know it, I know it, and now a judge knows it too." Blake slammed his hand on the counter. "You're being vindictive. I'm being fair. If you'd been honest, if you'd ended our marriage before starting a new relationship, we could have handled this amicably. But you didn't. You humiliated me publicly while stealing from me privately." "Stealing? That's insane. You used my credit card to buy jewelry for another woman. You charged romantic dinners with her to our joint account. You took money that I earned from my trust, from my inheritance, and spent it on your affair. Yes, Blake. That's stealing." He stared at me, and I could see him recalculating, trying to find an angle, a weakness, some way to manipulate the situation back in his favor. He wouldn't find one. I'd spent months closing every loophole. "Vivian," he tried, voice softening. "We've been together 10 years. That has to mean something. It meant something to me. Clearly, it didn't mean the same to you. I made a mistake. One mistake. People have affairs and recover. We could go to counseling." "Just like that? You won't even try?" "Blake, you posted about being single while we were still married. You flaunted your affair online for everyone to see. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Multiple choices over multiple months where you decided your happiness mattered more than our marriage or my dignity. So you're punishing me. I'm protecting myself. The distinction mattered. This wasn't about revenge, though that would be satisfying. It was about ensuring that Blake couldn't hurt me anymore. Couldn't take my money, my home, my sense of self-worth. He must have seen something in my face, some finality, because he changed tactics. What about my reputation? If this gets out, it's already out. You put it out when you posted that photo. My career will survive. You're a marketing executive, not a priest. Nobody cares about your personal life as much as you think they do." That hit home. Blake had always been obsessed with his image, with what people thought of him. The idea that his divorce might not be the scandal he feared seemed to wound him more than losing me. 2 weeks after the judge's ruling, Blake moved out. He took his clothes, his electronics, some furniture he'd bought before we married. Left behind everything we'd acquired together, all purchased with my money anyway. The house felt different after he left. Emptier, yes, but also lighter. Like a weight had been lifted. I walked through rooms that had been ours and felt them becoming mine again. I repainted the bedroom, sage green instead of the gray Blake had insisted on, replaced the modern furniture he'd chosen with the antique pieces I'd inherited from my grandmother. Put my photos back up, the ones Blake had taken down, because they didn't match the aesthetic. Slowly, the house stopped being our house and became my house. But the divorce was far from over. Blake's attorney filed motion after motion, dragging out the process, demanding financial disclosures, requesting depositions, challenging my claim to separate property, arguing that my grandmother's trust had somehow become marital property through commingling. Catherine shot down each motion methodically. We had documentation for everything, clear evidence that the trust had been kept separate, that I'd been meticulous about which accounts funded which expenses, that Blake had never contributed to the major assets he was now trying to claim. "He's grasping at straws," Catherine told me during one of our weekly meetings. "Walsh knows they have a weak case. They're just hoping you'll get tired of fighting and agree to a settlement." I won't. Good, because we're going to win this. Completely. What Blake didn't know, what Gregory Walsh didn't know, was that I'd been recording everything since February. Not illegally. Washington was a two-party consent state, so I couldn't record phone calls or private conversations. But I'd kept meticulous notes, screenshots of text messages, copies of emails, a detailed journal documenting every suspicious behavior, every lie I'd caught him in, every piece of evidence I'd discovered. I'd also hired a forensic accountant to trace Blake's spending, and what she'd found was damning. "He's been hiding money," she told me during a confidential meeting at Catherine's office. "Nothing huge, but he's been moving money into accounts you don't have access to, probably in preparation for divorce." Can we prove it? Yes, and more importantly, we can use it to show financial misconduct. Judges don't like it when one spouse tries to hide assets. So when Blake's attorney filed a motion requesting half the value of my grandmother's trust, arguing that it had grown during our marriage and that growth was marital property, Catherine countered with evidence of Blake's hidden accounts and his attempts to defraud me. The judge was not amused. "Mr. Walsh," the judge had said during the hearing, "your client is asking for half of assets he didn't contribute to, while simultaneously hiding his own assets. Can you explain to me why the court should view this favorably?" Gregory Walsh had argued that Blake was entitled to compensation for supporting me during our marriage, for being a partner even if he hadn't contributed financially. The judge had looked at the evidence, the social media post, the affair documentation, the financial records, and shut it down. "I'm denying the motion. Mrs. Hayes has clearly demonstrated that her family trust is separate property. Mr. Hayes's claim has no merit. It was the first major victory, but not the last. Over the next 6 months, Blake tried everything. He claimed I'd promised him half the house. He said I'd verbally agreed to support him if we divorced. He even tried to argue that he deserved compensation for emotional distress caused by the divorce. Every claim was disproven, every motion denied. And through it all, I watched Blake spiral, his perfect image crumbling, his confidence eroding, the reality setting in that he was going to lose everything. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding. I'd started seeing a therapist, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to process everything healthily, to understand how I'd ended up in a marriage with someone who treated me so poorly, to make sure I never made the same mistakes again. "You're stronger than you think," my therapist, Helena, told me during one session. "Most people in your situation would have fallen apart. You planned. You protected yourself. You took control. I didn't have a choice. You did. You could have stayed. Could have accepted the affair. Could have convinced yourself it was your fault somehow. Many people do. But you didn't. You chose yourself. Choosing myself. It sounded simple, but it hadn't been. I'd spent 10 years putting Blake first. His career, his comfort, his happiness, always with the implicit promise that he'd do the same for me. He never had. I'd just been too invested in the marriage to see it, but now I saw everything clearly. Saw how Blake had used me, how he'd benefited from my family's money while complaining that I didn't contribute enough to our household. How he'd criticized my appearance while cheating on me with someone younger. How he'd isolated me from friends who might have pointed out how poorly he was treating me. It had been subtle. Death by 1,000 cuts. Each individual incident small enough to rationalize away. But together, they painted a picture of a man who'd never valued me as a partner, only as a resource. And I was done being anyone's resource. 8 months after filing for divorce, we finally reached a settlement. Not because Blake wanted to settle. He'd have dragged this out forever if he could. But because Gregory Walsh had finally convinced him that he was going to lose if we went to trial. The terms were straightforward. I kept the house, my trust fund, and all assets purchased with trust money. Blake kept his retirement accounts and the savings he'd accumulated before our marriage. We split the value of his car, one of the few things purchased with joint funds. No spousal support in either direction. Blake would walk away with almost exactly what he'd brought into the marriage, nothing more. He's furious. Catherine told me after the final settlement conference. Walsh says he's convinced you manipulated the system. The system just treated us equally. He can't stand that. He really thought he'd get half of everything. He thought I was too weak to fight back. Catherine smiled. That was his biggest mistake. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in October, 10 months after I'd filed. I went to the courthouse alone. Blake didn't even show up for the final hearing. Signed the papers, listened to the judge declare our marriage dissolved, and walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I'd felt in years. The first month after the divorce was strange. Not bad, just strange. Like learning to live in a body I'd forgotten was mine. I slept in the center of the bed instead of on my side, ate dinner at whatever time I wanted, watched TV shows Blake had always complained about. Small things, but they mattered. Each one a tiny declaration of independence. I also started reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Women who drifted away over the years. Not because we'd fought, but because Blake had always made social plans so complicated. Always had opinions about who we should spend time with. Always somehow managed to schedule things that conflicted with get-togethers he didn't want to attend. Without him, I realized how isolated I'd become. We thought you were avoiding us, my college friend Alexis said over coffee. Every time we invited you to something, you'd cancel at the last minute. Blake always had plans, I said, or claimed he did. I didn't realize how much he was controlling my social life until after he was gone. That's typical abuser behavior. He wasn't abusive, Vivian. Alexis put her hand over mine. Isolation, control, undermining your confidence. That's emotional abuse. Just because he never hit you doesn't mean he wasn't hurting you. The word abuse made me uncomfortable. Abuse was what happened to other people. Women who were obviously trapped, obviously suffering. Not me. Not someone with money and education and options. Except I had been trapped. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, financially, socially. Blake had spent 10 years systematically controlling every aspect of our life together, and I'd let him because I'd believed that's what marriage meant. Compromise, sacrifice, putting your partner first. I'd never realized that Blake wasn't doing the same for me. I'm sorry I disappeared, I told Alexis. I should have been a better friend. You're here now. That's what matters. Over the next few months, I rebuilt my social circle, started attending book club again, joined a hiking group, volunteered at the animal shelter I'd stopped going to because Blake was allergic to dogs. He wasn't. I found the allergy medication he'd hidden when I was cleaning out his bathroom. Each new activity, each reconnection, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost. But the biggest change was professional. Before marrying Blake, I'd been on track for a career in nonprofit management. I'd worked at a children's advocacy organization, was being groomed for a director position, had dreams of making a real difference. Then Blake had gotten promoted, had needed to network more, attend more events, project a certain image, and somehow my career had gotten put on hold. Just temporarily, he'd said. Just until I'm established. Then you can go back. That had been 8 years ago. I'd never gone back. Instead, I'd volunteered, organized charity galas, served on boards, done work that mattered, but only part-time, only in ways that didn't interfere with being Blake's wife. Now, I wanted my career back. I started by reaching out to my old boss, Catherine, who now ran a major advocacy nonprofit. We met for lunch, and I explained my situation. The divorce, the lost years, the desire to return to meaningful work. I have a position opening up, Catherine said. Director of Development. It's a lot of responsibility, but you have the skills. You've been running charity events for years. That's different from a full-time job. Not as different as you think. You understand donors. You know how to build relationships. You're organized and professional. You could do this work in your sleep. I've been out of the field for years. Vivian. Catherine leaned forward. You've spent the last decade undervaluing yourself because someone told you your work wasn't important. I'm telling you, it is. You're talented. You're capable. And I want you on my team. I took the job. Starting work again felt like waking up from a long sleep. I'd forgotten how good it felt to be challenged, to be valued for my skills rather than my ability to plan a perfect dinner party. To have colleagues who respected my ideas instead of a husband who dismissed them. The work was demanding. I was learning new systems, rebuilding skills that had gone rusty, proving myself in a competitive field. But I loved it. Every exhausting day reminded me that I was more than just Blake's ex-wife. I was Vivian Hayes, development director, making a real difference in children's lives. Blake, meanwhile, was not doing as well. I didn't follow his social media. I'd blocked him on everything after the divorce. But I heard things through mutual acquaintances. His relationship with Kimberly had imploded within months of our divorce being finalized. Apparently, she'd expected him to have money from the settlement and had been unpleasantly surprised to learn he'd gotten almost nothing. She dumped him pretty quickly after that, Alexis reported, with barely concealed glee. Guess she was more interested in his wallet than his personality. Blake had also been forced to move into a small apartment, nothing like the beautiful house he'd been living in with me. I heard through the grapevine that he'd tried to buy a house, but couldn't qualify for a mortgage large enough for the neighborhoods he wanted to live in. Not without my income and credit supporting him. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly, I just felt free. Free of him, free of the drama, free of caring about what he did or didn't have. My life was full without Blake in it. Fuller, actually. 6 months after the divorce, I was having dinner with Alexis and some other friends when someone mentioned they'd seen Blake at a bar, complaining loudly about his vindictive ex-wife, who'd stolen everything from him. "What did you do?" one friend asked me. "I protected my assets. That's different from stealing." He's telling everyone you manipulated the system, that you had some fancy lawyer who convinced the judge to give you everything. The judge gave me what was legally mine. Blake thought he was entitled to my family's money just because he married me. The law disagreed. Still, Alexis said, must feel good to know he's struggling while you're thriving. Did it feel good? I thought about it. Thought about Blake in his small apartment, working to rebuild a life he'd taken for granted. Thought about him realizing, probably for the first time, that he'd had it pretty good being married to me. It feels finished, I said finally, like a chapter that's completely closed. I don't wish him ill, but I don't wish him well either. I just wish him distant. That got a laugh from the table. But it was true. Blake had become irrelevant to my life. A cautionary tale, maybe. A reminder to trust my instincts and never again compromise myself for someone who wouldn't do the same for me. But not someone I thought about anymore. One evening in early spring, a full year after I'd filed for divorce, I was home alone, reading on the couch, when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a delivery person with a large package. "Vivian Hayes?" "Yes." "Sign here, please." I signed, brought the package inside, and opened it to find all the photos from our wedding. Professional portraits, candids, the whole album. Along with a note in Blake's handwriting. "Thought you'd want these. I don't need them anymore." I stared at the photos. Young Vivian, beaming in her wedding dress. Blake in his tux, looking handsome and confident. Both of us so hopeful, so convinced we were starting something beautiful. We'd been so wrong. Or rather, I'd been wrong. I'd believed in us. Blake had believed in what I could do for him. I could have been bitter. Could have thrown the photos away. Could have burned them in some dramatic gesture of moving on. Instead, I put them in a box in the attic. They were part of my history, even if they represented a mistake. And mistakes, my therapist had taught me, were only valuable if you learned from them. I'd learned plenty. That night, I made myself dinner, pasta carbonara, something Blake had never liked, and ate it on the couch while watching a documentary he would have hated. And I felt content. Not ecstatically happy, not perfectly healed, just content. My life was mine again, and that was enough. The second year after the divorce brought unexpected developments. The first came on a random Tuesday when I received a LinkedIn message from someone named Troy Blackwood, who introduced himself as a headhunter specializing in nonprofit executive placements. "I've been following your work at the Children's Advocacy Center," his message read. "I have a client looking for an executive director for a regional nonprofit. The role is a significant step up from your current position. Would you be interested in discussing it?" I almost said no. I'd only been director of development for 18 months. Executive director felt too ambitious, too soon. But then I remembered Blake's voice in my head. "You're too cautious. You'll never achieve anything if you don't take risks." Blake had been wrong about most things, but maybe not that. I agreed to meet with Troy. The position was for a well-established nonprofit focused on housing assistance and homeless services. The salary was nearly double what I was making. The responsibilities were daunting, overseeing a staff of 30, managing a multi-million-dollar budget, fundraising at a level I'd never attempted before. "You're qualified," Troy assured me. "Your track record in development is excellent. You've successfully managed complex fundraising campaigns. You understand the nonprofit landscape. You just need to believe you can do this. Believe I could do it." That had always been the issue, hadn't it? Not ability, but confidence. Blake had spent 10 years undermining my self-belief, and even a year after leaving him, his voice still echoed in my head, telling me I wasn't ready, wasn't capable, wasn't enough. But I was enough. I'd proven that by surviving the divorce, by rebuilding my life, by succeeding at my current job despite years away from the field. I applied for the position. The interview process was rigorous, 3 rounds, including a presentation to the board of directors. I prepared obsessively, researching the organization, analyzing their programs, developing ideas for how to expand their reach and increase their funding. On the day of my final interview, I stood in front of 12 board members and presented a 3-year strategic plan for growing the organization. I spoke confidently, answered questions thoughtfully, and left feeling like I'd given it my best shot. They offered me the job 2 days later. "Congratulations," Catherine said when I told her I'd be leaving. "I'm losing an excellent staff member, but I'm thrilled to see you step into leadership. You've earned this. Thank you for everything, for taking a chance on me when I'd been out of the field for so long. You took a chance on yourself. I just gave you the opportunity." The second unexpected development came from a more surprising source: Blake's mother. Eleanor Hayes had never been warm to me during my marriage. She'd made it clear from the beginning that she thought her son could have done better, that I was too serious, too focused on my own work, not supportive enough of Blake's career. After the divorce, I'd assumed I'd never hear from her again. We'd had no children, no reason to maintain contact. She'd probably been told Blake's version of the divorce, that I was vindictive, greedy, manipulative. So when she called my cell phone 18 months after the divorce was finalized, I was stunned. "Vivian," she said, her voice formal. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, I have a moment. Is everything okay?" "Yes. Well, no. I'm calling because I owe you an apology." Silence. I genuinely didn't know how to respond. "I believed Blake's version of your marriage," Eleanor continued. "He told me you were difficult, that you were controlling with money, that you'd refuse to compromise or support his career. I believed him because he's my son, okay, but I've learned things, seen things. Blake has been through several relationships since your divorce. All of them ended the same way, with the women leaving and Blake blaming them for being unreasonable. I started to see a pattern. I see. I also learned about the affair, about how he'd been cheating on you and posting about being single while you were still married. Blake told me you'd fabricated that evidence. He said you'd manipulated the divorce proceedings, but I saw the actual social media posts. I know what he did. Mrs. Hayes, Eleanor, please, and Vivian, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how I treated you during your marriage. I'm sorry for believing Blake's lies after the divorce. I'm sorry for not being the mother-in-law you deserved. You were good to my son, and he threw it away. The apology was unexpected and, frankly, unnecessary. Eleanor had been cold to me, yes, but she hadn't been cruel. She just believed her son, which most mothers would do. I appreciate you telling me this, I said. It must have been difficult. It was, but it was necessary. You deserve to know that I understand now, that I don't blame you for the divorce, that I'm actually proud of how you handled it, with dignity and strength. Many women would have fallen apart. I almost did, but you didn't. That matters. We talked for a few more minutes. It wasn't a long conversation, and it didn't erase the decade of coolness between us. But it was closure of a sort. Acknowledgement that I hadn't been the problem in my marriage, that Blake had been. The third development was perhaps the most significant. I started dating again. It wasn't intentional. I hadn't been looking for a relationship. In fact, I'd been actively avoiding the possibility, convinced I needed more time to heal, more time to figure out who I was outside of marriage. But then I met Daniel. He was a grant writer for a different nonprofit, and we'd been introduced at a professional conference. He was thoughtful, funny, and refreshingly straightforward. When he asked me to coffee, I almost said no. Almost told him I wasn't ready, but I was tired of letting fear dictate my choices. Tired of Blake's voice in my head telling me I wasn't enough, wasn't ready, wasn't worth someone's time. So I said yes. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a weekend hike. The hike turned into regular dates, into genuine connection, into the slow building of something that felt different from anything I'd experienced with Blake. You're cautious, Daniel observed one evening over dinner. Not in a bad way, just careful, like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Bad marriage, I explained. I'm working on trusting again. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. The simple patience of that statement, the absence of pressure or expectation, was healing in itself. Blake had always been pushing me to be different, better, more of what he wanted. Daniel seemed content with who I actually was. Can I ask what happened with your marriage? He said. You don't have to answer if you're not comfortable. My ex-husband had an affair, posted about being single on social media while we were still married. When I filed for divorce, he fought for half of everything, even though most of our assets were from my family's money. It got ugly. Sounds like you handled it well. I handled it strategically. I don't know if that's the same as well. Sometimes strategic is the same as well, especially when you're dealing with someone who's being unreasonable. It was such a simple observation, but it landed differently coming from Daniel. He didn't see my careful planning as cold or vindictive. He saw it as smart, as self-protection. Maybe it had been both. 6 months into dating Daniel, I realized I was happy. Not the manic, desperate happiness of my early marriage to Blake, where I'd convinced myself that if I just tried hard enough, everything would be perfect. But a quieter, steadier happiness. The kind that came from being with someone who actually saw me and liked what he saw. I love you, Daniel said one evening, as we were cooking dinner together in my kitchen. I froze mid-chop. What? I love you. I've been wanting to say it for a while, but I didn't want to rush things. But Vivian, I love you. The way you throw yourself into your work, the way you laugh at terrible jokes, the way you're rebuilding your life with such intentionality, All of it. I set down the knife, turned to face him. I love you too. Yeah? Yeah, we kissed. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope that this relationship would save me or complete me or fix what was broken, but hope that it could be a part of a good life. A life I was building on my own terms. That summer, 2 years after my divorce was finalized, I went to a charity gala, not as an organizer this time, but as executive director of my organization. I was networking, chatting with donors, feeling confident in my role and my life. And I ran into Blake. He was there with a date. Another young woman, another blonde, another person who looked vaguely like Kimberly. He saw me at the same moment I saw him, and I watched his face go through a series of expressions. Surprise, discomfort, something that might have been regret. He made his way over. Vivian, hi. Blake, you look good. Really good. Thank you. I heard you're running the Housing Alliance now. That's impressive. It's challenging work. I enjoy it. And you're seeing someone? He glanced at my left hand, where I wore no ring. Or not married again. Not married, dating someone. It's going well. Good. That's good. Glad you're happy. The conversation was stilted, awkward. Two strangers making small talk about lives that no longer intersected. I should go, Blake said after a pause. My date is waiting. But Vivian, I'm sorry. For everything. I know I said that before, but I mean it. I handled our marriage badly. You deserved better. Yes, I agreed, I did. He flinched slightly, but nodded. Take care of yourself. You too. I watched him walk away, back to his date, back to his life. And I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering hurt. Just a distant acknowledgement that he'd been part of my story, but he wasn't part of my present. That chapter was truly closed. Daniel appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of wine. Was that him? That was him. How do you feel? Indifferent. Which is exactly how I should feel. Good. He doesn't deserve any real estate in your head. He doesn't have any. And it was true. Blake had become a story I told sometimes, a lesson I'd learned, a mistake I wouldn't repeat. But he wasn't a presence in my life anymore. Wasn't someone I thought about or worried about or defined myself in relation to. I was just Vivian, whole, complete, happy. That was the best revenge of all. 3 years after the divorce, I got a call from Catherine. We'd stayed in touch sporadically. She'd send me Christmas cards. I'd occasionally email her updates about my life. But we hadn't spoken in months, so the call was unexpected. I have something to tell you, she said. And I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it elsewhere. Okay, Blake is being sued. Multiple former business partners claiming fraud. Apparently, he's been misrepresenting his assets and income to investors. They're saying he defrauded them out of significant sums of money. I sat down heavily. Are you serious? Completely. The case was filed last week. There's already been some local news coverage. I wanted you to know in case reporters start calling you for comment. Why would they call me? Because you're his ex-wife. Because you divorced him under what the press will probably describe as contentious circumstances. They'll want to know if you saw signs of financial misconduct during your marriage. I did. He was hiding money in accounts I didn't know about. Be very careful what you say if reporters contact you. You don't want to appear vindictive. Just stick to facts. You discovered financial irregularities during your divorce proceedings. Your attorney handled them. You have no knowledge of his current business practices. Got it. And Vivian, you dodged a bullet. If you'd still been married to him when this lawsuit hit, you could have been liable for his debts. Your assets could have been at risk. I hung up feeling shaken. Not because I cared what happened to Blake, but because of how close I'd come to being dragged down with him. If I'd stayed, if I'd believed his lies, if I'd waited even a few more months to file for divorce. I called Daniel. Can you come over? Something's happened. He arrived within the hour, listened to the whole story, and pulled me into a hug. You were right to leave when you did. You protected yourself. I had no idea he was committing actual fraud. But you knew something was wrong. You trusted your instincts. He was right. I'd known something was off, even if I hadn't known the full extent, and I'd acted on that knowledge instead of making excuses. That had saved me. The news broke publicly 2 days later. Local media picked up the story. Seattle marketing executive accused of defrauding investors. Blake's photo was plastered across the news sites, along with details about the lawsuit. My phone started ringing. Reporters wanting comment. Old friends wanting gossip. People I barely knew suddenly interested in my divorce story. I declined all interviews. Released a brief statement through Catherine. Miss Hayes has been divorced from Mr. Hayes for 3 years. She has no knowledge of or involvement in his current business practices. But I did read the news coverage, and what I read was damning. Blake had apparently been running a scheme where he'd present himself as a wealthy investor with significant assets. He'd convince small business owners to partner with him on ventures, promising capital he didn't actually have. When the businesses struggled, because Blake's promised investment never materialized, he'd blame the business owners and walk away, leaving them with debt and failed enterprises. It was sophisticated fraud, and according to the lawsuit, he'd been doing it for years. Did he do this while you were married? Alexis asked when we met for coffee. I don't know. He was definitely hiding money and misrepresenting his financial situation to me, but I don't know if he was defrauding other people. Do you think he married you for your money? I'd been asking myself that question since Catherine's call. Had Blake ever loved me? Or had I just been another mark, another source of assets he could leverage? Maybe, I admitted, maybe he did love me, in his way, but he definitely valued my family's money. And when I filed for divorce and he realized he wouldn't get any of it, he must have turned to fraud to maintain his lifestyle. That's sociopathic. That's Blake. The lawsuit moved slowly through the courts. I wasn't involved. I'd been divorced for years, and Blake's alleged fraud had occurred after our separation. But I heard updates through mutual acquaintances. Blake's business had collapsed. He'd been forced to declare bankruptcy. Some of his former partners were pursuing criminal charges, not just civil claims. The man who'd posted about his single life 3 years ago, so confident, so pleased with himself, was now facing potential prison time. I should have felt vindicated. Should have felt satisfied, seeing him finally face consequences for his actions. Instead, I felt tired. Tired of Blake being a presence in my life, even tangentially. Tired of being Blake Hayes' ex-wife in news coverage. Tired of the whole sorry story. I want to move, I told Daniel one evening. Out of Seattle, somewhere new, somewhere Blake isn't. Where were you thinking? Portland, maybe. Or San Francisco. Somewhere I can work in the non-profit sector, but start fresh. Somewhere I'm not Vivian, who divorced the fraudster. I could look for work there too, if you want company. I looked at him, surprised. You'd move for me? I'd move with you. There's a difference. You don't think it's running away? I think it's moving towards something better instead of staying stuck in something that's done. That's not running away. That's moving forward. We started planning. I put out feelers for executive director positions in Portland. Daniel started networking with nonprofit organizations there. We talked about finding a place together, a fresh start for both of us, free from the baggage of my past with Blake. 4 months later, I accepted a position as executive director of a major homeless services organization in Portland. Daniel found work at a community foundation. We moved into a townhouse in the Pearl District, unpacking boxes and building a life together. On my last day in Seattle, I drove past the Laurelhurst house one final time. Someone else lived there now. I'd sold it a year earlier, ready to let go of that chapter of my life. The new owners had repainted it, updated the landscaping. It looked beautiful, but unfamiliar. That house had been my refuge during the divorce, my symbol of independence, my proof that I owned something Blake couldn't take. But I didn't need that proof anymore. I knew my worth now, knew I was capable of building a life on my own terms. Knew I'd never again let someone make me feel small or dependent or less than I was. I drove away without looking back. Epilogue. 5 years after Blake posted that photo claiming to be single, I stood in my office in Portland, looking out at the city I'd grown to love. My organization had just secured a major grant that would allow us to expand our services. The press release announcing it was going out that afternoon. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Dinner tonight to celebrate. Your favorite restaurant. I smiled. Perfect. I'll be home by 6. Proud of you. Love you. Love you too. I set down the phone and thought about how far I'd come. From that moment in Whole Foods, staring at Blake's social media post. From the months of secretly gathering evidence. From the day I'd served him with divorce papers. From all the battles and hearings and strategic moves that had gotten me out of that marriage. It had been hard, exhausting, sometimes lonely, but it had been worth it, because now I had a life I'd built entirely on my own terms, a career I was proud of, a partner who valued me, a sense of self that no one could take away. Blake was serving time now, 18 months for fraud. He'd be out eventually, would probably try to rebuild his life, would maybe even succeed at some level. I hoped he'd learn something, hoped he'd become a better person, but mostly I just didn't think about him. He'd become irrelevant to my story, a villain in the first act, but not a presence in the rest of the narrative. The revenge I'd taken, the strategic divorce, the protection of my assets, the rebuilding of my life, it had never really been about him. It had been about me, about reclaiming myself, about refusing to be diminished by someone else's lies and manipulation and casual cruelty. I'd posted the divorce papers, both literally and figuratively, and in doing so, I'd written Blake out of my life. Not with drama or spectacle, but with careful planning and clear boundaries and absolute determination. That was the victory. Not his downfall, but my rise. I turned away from the window, back to my work. There were emails to answer, programs to plan, lives to change. Important work, meaningful work. Work that reminded me every day that I was more than just someone's ex-wife. I was Vivian Hayes, executive director, partner, survivor, woman who'd taken the worst betrayal of her life and transformed it into the catalyst for her best years. And if Blake happened to suffer along the way, well, that was just karma doing what karma does. The divorce papers I'd posted, both literally to the court and figuratively to the world, had been my declaration of independence, my refusal to be a victim, my claim to a future that was entirely mine. Best decision I'd ever made.